Hi everyone. So this is the first in a series of lessons in using Ursina to create a first-person shooter. I've based these lessons off a lot of the material I found online from other YouTube videos, or alternatively from the sample Ursina code, and it'll just give you the basis for a game that you can then basically modify, stretch, change to be your own, whatever. So it's not completed by any means, but it will give you a good start. Okay, so I'm going to just show you where my lessons are while I am making a whole lot of videos. The lessons themselves will be supported using my GitHub account. So this here is my GitHub address, bradnielsen2981, Ursina template, and you'll find that there are branches for each particular lesson of my code. And while sometimes there'll be a couple of videos using the same lesson, it'll give you the ability to follow along if for whatever reason you don't get the code to work, etc. So the lessons are here. Hopefully there'll only be about 10 lessons, and I'm going to try to stick to like a 15-minute time limit or shorter based on how we go. So let's get started. This here is my Ursina code, and as I said, I've based it along the lines of a lot of the samples I've already seen, but I've also made it very much object-oriented. And one of the best things about Ursina is that it's actually very much object-oriented. So the challenge, of course, is that if you don't have much of a background in object-oriented coding, I'd strongly recommend that you do a small little tutorial on it. I don't think objects are that difficult to understand, but I'm going to just say that if you do learn object-oriented programming, it's going to fully transform your skills as a programmer. So in terms of Ursina, Ursina's got a series of pre-built objects that you can use to create a 3D game. Ursina itself is based off a Python 3D framework called Panda 3D, and we'll be primarily programming using Python. Just to have a quick look at the structure of my code, you'll notice that I have built initially an object called game. Now, you won't find this in the Ursina tutorials or sample code, but for myself, I think creating some sort of game controller entity can actually help your programming. It means that we have one object that kind of keeps track of the state of our game, kind of controls the various game objects in the game, and we can communicate with it when we want something in particular to happen. So I've structured my global code, as you could say, inside this class called game. Inside this class called game, I have created texts, and I'll talk more about that later on. I've created the light. I've created a sky, and currently I'm using just the default sky, but we can change that. I've created a ground, which is simply a plane. And don't worry if you don't understand this stuff yet. We are going to be looking at this more in depth as we go on. It's just, I'm trying to give you a broad overview of my code at the moment. So I've got a game object. Inside that game object, I initialize everything. I create a function for my menu. I create a function for loading. I create a function for starting the game. And I create a function for ending the game. And then inside my game itself, I process input and I process the update function. Now, this is where game theory comes into it, because all games that involve some type of animation will generally follow this type of loop structure. As in, the game engine itself will process all the input, whether it's keyboard or mouse. it will update the game objects inside the game, and then it will render it, and then it will actually manage the system clock or the game clock to synchronize certain things. And what that means is that if someone's computer is actually running at a much faster frame rate, they will have a similar experience, although better graphics, than someone who is actually running a worse computer with a slower frame rate. Because obviously a game is meant to work with certain types of speeds and so on. So the clock function there is about ensuring that people get a commonality of experience. The other thing the clock will do is it can actually trigger any type of time event, and we'll see how we use those type of time events or alarms later on. But that's the basic flow of a game, and Ursina will actually do all the rendering for you, manage the clock for you, but what it will do is that when you create game objects, each game object will have an input function and an update function, and Ursina will automatically call those functions for you. So anything you add into your game will automatically be processed, and therefore it's much easier to program. Okay, so you can see I don't have anything in my update function, but yes, it's going to be called every frame. I do, however, have something in my input function. For my game, I'm going to make it so that if the input function has a key pressed of tab, I'm actually going to pause my game. This code I got from an Ursina sample tutorial. All it does is it actually allows you to change from your standard camera to the editor camera. And you'll see when I run the game, the initial game, that we can actually press tab and pause everything and move around our screen. You'll see that I've also added the key escape. So if you press escape, it will automatically exit. And the other thing is, currently, if the game is in the menu state, if you press the key press of space, it'll actually load the game and start the game. So the way I have structured my code, and I would suggest strongly that you don't try to type all this code yourself. I would just download my lesson 1 code from my GitHub and work from there. You'll see that I go through some stages in terms of my game. I'm just going to press play now. The stages are, I go through the menu screen, which is going to show up in a second. With the menu screen, you press space. Then it goes into the loading stage. The loading stage will load any of my entities, and then it's going to start the game. And at the moment, I am simply a red box, and I'm moving around my world. And you can see that below me is the plane, and above me is the sky. Okay, I'm going to stop the tutorial here, and I'll see you in the next one.